Hello, everybody, and welcome to What is Truth, episode 72. I'm John Barnwell. I'm here in Detroit, Detroit, the Straits, on the border of Canada and the Detroit River. And in the middle of, well, not the middle, but out in the Detroit River, next to Detroit, we have Belle Isle. And on Belle Isle, they have this wonderful statue of Friedrich Schiller that was donated by the German American community many years ago. And it's an interesting thing because most people that I know in Detroit, if you mentioned it, they'd have no clue that it even existed or perhaps even who he was. And although we did have on television here when I was a young lad, we had a television series, William Tell, and some of them might have figured out that that's where that story came from. But it reminds me of one of the people that I consider to be a spiritual mentor of sorts. He's great inspiration for me is one of the founders of the Camp Hill community. That's the Camp Hill is the centers that were founded by Karl Koenig. And Karl Koenig was an interesting anthroposophist who was, during World War II, interred on the Isle of Man with other German anthroposophists. And they figured, well, while we're there, we all come from different disciplines related to the work of Rudolf Steiner. So why don't we all teach each other what we know? And included in that group was the astrosopher, Willy Zucker. And Willy Zucker's, I got his books here somewhere. We'll get into that some other time. But he's the author of the numerous works on astrosophy, which is the star wisdom based on the work of Rudolf Steiner. And of course, I mentioned last week the significance of, here's his book. Yeah, here's one of his books, Cosmic Christianity, The Changing Countenance of Cosmology, An Introduction to Astrosophy, A New Wisdom of the Stars. And there you see that. That's the orbital pattern of Venus. It creates that pentagram, which is the rose. And of course, you get people with their obsessive understanding. They think that the pentagram is something evil. Well, you can use it to represent the polarity that sometimes is framed as good and evil. So you have the reverse pentagram and that whole symbolic procession, shall we say. And but generally, in occult symbolism, the inverted pentagram is a symbol of a human being as a plant, but also it's a symbol of the feminine. So you have the upright masculine star and the reversed feminine star. And then there's the other aspect of it, that there's the two images of the planet Venus, and that pertains to the rising Venus and the setting Venus. So you have on the horizon. But the anthroposophical star wisdom was begun by Elizabeth Rita, who was the head of the mathematical astronomical section of the Anthroposophical Society. And she has some books, like here's one, Astrosophy and Astrology, the Astronomical Letters of Elizabeth Rita, and a book on the Bodhisattva. So, as is usually the case, I spend my time leading up to this. I wake up about 4 in the morning and start preparing for the show. Figure out, okay, let's see, I've done this show here now with Reverend David. This will be the 72nd episode, as I said earlier. That it gets kind of long-winded after a while. You have to come up with things. Of course, usually what I do is I tag on things that I'm working on myself because they're freshly framed in my mind. And but again, I'm still working with that interplay that Friedrich Schiller was able to come up with so effectively in his aesthetic letters on education that led no less a figure than Hegel to consider him a great philosopher. And so you go, well, what did he do? And if you go read it, it's so well crafted that it's almost disarming in the way in which it deals with this polarity between the intellect and nature, reason, and then the drives, the Apollonian order and the Dionysian instinctual proclivities, the call of nature. And so he wrote the aesthetic letters of education. And if you want to access them, there's a link in the previous episode beneath it. You can read the whole thing. But the point is that he wrote these in response to what happened with the French Revolution, because he was a fan of the ideas that were starting to evolve to get past the system, the feudal system, and to move into the res publica, the republic, that the governing body that in which the people were participants in a more dynamic way. Of course, that got derailed and by the Jacobins and the beheading of the king and all of that. Friedrich Schiller was aghast. And so he wrote these aesthetic letters on education, and they influenced Goethe. And it's interesting because you see Schiller's early works in the Sturm und Drang period, and when he got to meeting Goethe and all of that, it was transformative for him. And it was transformative for Goethe also. And Rudolf Steiner, he makes an interesting point, and I'm going to share it with you here because it's that whole dilemma of equilibrating the reason, because if you just follow reason, you become you're not free. You're a slave to reason. Reason determines that I have to act in such way, and likewise, if we just follow our proclivities regarding nature, that's not free either. That we could be a slave of the flesh, so to speak. And but regarding this dilemma, in the lecture cycle that was published as Old and New Methods of Initiation by Rudolf Steiner in February of 1922, it's Collected Works, about volume 210. But he says, and I quote, "We cannot simply decide to stop thinking, for thinking is a power which came with the fifth post-Atlantean period." That would be in 1414 AD that it began. "And it is a power which must be practiced, but it must be developed in a direction that was actually begun by Goethe in his fairy tale of the green snake and the beautiful lily. It must be practiced in such a way that it leads to imagination. We must understand that the power of the intellect chases away the spirit. But if the power of the intellect itself could be developed to become the faculty of imagination, then we can approach the spirit once more. Well, with that, I'll say hello to good old Reverend David William Parry in the bountiful, sometimes merry old England and city of London. How you doing there, Reverend David?
Good to be on my home show with my good buddy John Barnwell. Yeah, okay, I suppose. I mean, it always comes back on this show to one thing: intellect looking at imagination that leads to art. That's because art is superior. Yeah, a couple of things, I suppose, to what you said. I mean, yeah, I have a thing about Hegel, but at the end of the day, I'm some sort of Wittgensteinian, because I think he stops everybody in their tracks. You know, what are they expressing, and in what way do they think they're expressing it? I mean, one thing, I mean, you put it very succinctly, you know, what's the history of Europe? A belief in faith, a belief in reason, and then a belief in power, none of which were conclusive. So is that good or bad? I don't know. You know, and it's weird if you look at recent history. Some people say the Nazis were the embodiment of reason without a heart. I can sort of see that one, you know, sort of that hideous strength by C.S. Lewis, The Brain Without a Body. I can sort of see that. So, in other words, it had intellect, but it didn't have any feelings. I can sort of see that. Some people say they were a group of neo-Nietzscheans. That was an element in it all, I suppose. You know, who were just wild and wild, full stop, I suppose. I don't know. I think as brushstrokes go, you can see history developing through, as I say, faith, reason, and power. I suspect we're still in the dominion of the power thing, so that's a bit of a worry. Apart from that, oh yeah, you mentioned pentagrams. I think, wasn't it Eliphas Levi that started all of that? I never know how you say his name. We used to call him the elephant because we didn't know how to say his name, and apparently loads of Frenchies don't know how to say his name either. So, I mean, it was him, wasn't it? You know, the right way up, it's the symbol of a human being, and the other way up, it's the goat. What was it? Attacking heaven with its horns. And okay, it's interesting. Interesting. What was it? The Theory and Dogma of Magic. I think it's in that one. I actually asked some Wiccans what they thought about it, and that's not what they think about it at all. So going up is the man, going down is the woman. I don't want to get technical. I think people can probably work that out. And for them, it's good both ways. You know, both ways, whether it's pointing up or whether it's pointing down. So you know, it depends where you're coming from. I mean, all this symbology, all very important stuff, but symbols have languages of their own, and I think that's why one of the reasons why Wittgenstein's on my mind a lot at the minute. Because it depends on the context. It depends how the symbol is being used, what particular body of associations one is using, what he would have called a language going. So it depends, you know, what the reference is, what the inferences are, if there are any. So all of that makes language on a different level. Also, I've been forced, probably against my better judgment, for reasons we may discuss, I don't know, to sort of change around my publishing schedule. So the next one will actually be, I've nearly finished this bloody book on Catholicism. Now it's got to wait. The next one will be probably another collection of poetry. Oh no, I'll say it. Yeah, what was it? Was it Leo used to say? Shameless self-publicity. Because Victor Sobchak is staging my earlier two books as part of the Camden Fringe in August. So the Russians are saying, have you got any further collections? So I'm running around like a maniac at the minute. Yes, you know, trying to get them. I do, but it's all over the place. And trying to get it together. I'm trying to work with that incredible guy, Alex Galper, Russian American. He was a student of Allen Ginsberg. I had created an event a couple of years back for charity where he was going to speak as sort of the resident international poet. This is my dig at Britain. He arrived in Britain. That was right. So he's got a Russian passport and he's got an American passport. This is very important for what comes next. So 2 passports, 2 nationalities. He arrived at Heathrow and there were no problems at all. And he said, "Oh, well, when is this?" And I said, "Well, Sunday afternoon. It's a fundraiser. It's a charity thing." And he said, "Oh, I'll go and visit some friends in Berlin for tomorrow and I'll be back." And when it got to the Sunday early afternoon, they wouldn't let him re-enter the country because he only had a Russian passport. He was holding his American passport up and they wouldn't look at it. It didn't exist. And he said, "Can you contact the organizer of this event? Do you have a reason to be here?" "Yes, I'm speaking at David Parry's event." No, they didn't want to contact me. That very, very cheeky. He messaged me a number that they gave him, which was an automated service because it was the weekend. Very, very sneaky and very nasty. They wouldn't let him in the country. Hang on, he's an American citizen. Why isn't he allowed entry to the country? And had to go back to Berlin because he hadn't dotted all the dots and crossed the T's. But this is a bit silly. But he's an incredible poet. He writes in short, harsh versicles. Does Alex Galper believe in anything? I'll have to ask myself that over the next couple of weeks because, as I say, it will be a collaborative work. That's on my mind a lot. The Wittgenstein thing is on my mind a lot. The first time I read Wittgenstein and realised there was mysticism behind all of that, or at least partly all of that. I met Norman Malcolm because he was... How old was Norman Malcolm? I went to university late. Because in those days, it wasn't an automatic process. You thought about it. Is this going to do me any good or not? So I thought about it and thought, well, yeah, well, it probably would. And so with a couple of mates, decided to go to different places. He was still alive and teaching. What a moody bugger. You had to walk in. It was like sixth form. You had to walk in with a copy of either the Tractatus or the Philosophical Investigations under your arm, and you had to have done the reading, or he'd shout at you like the headmaster and order you out the class. And, oh my God, that's one of the most important Wittgensteinians in the world, acting like a sort of secondary school teacher. So lots of people were scared of him. I was just sort of gobsmacked, an amazing guy. And I also had D.Z. Phillips as a sort of a little mate, whose books on prayer, Wittgensteinianism on religion, I think is very revealing and freeing. It frees you from all sorts of hang-ups. Why am I saying all of that? Because I can beat you. For once, John Bowell, I can beat you. At the moment, I'm working by 3:30 every morning to get these bloody books done on time. So I'm not sent nasty emails by people. Yeah, I mean, so how am I at the minute? I don't know. We had a service of worship at Valentine's Hall earlier, which was very, very lovely. It really feels like a community is developing there now. We're preparing for Alan Cox to become a bishop of all things. I think he's already determined to make us all call him Your Grace. I wish all that had stopped. And a feeling, I don't know, very happy to be talking to you. It's a sort of necessary Sunday ritual. I'm wondering if there are any sort of Wittgensteinian anthroposophists. I mean, that would be a turn up. How about yourself, John?
Well, I think that it's really something that you actually studied with one of Wittgenstein's principal students. That's, you never cease to amaze me, and that's, I think, part of the reason why we can't seem to find closure in this conversation is that there's always another rabbit hole we can go down, and that's a good thing. Even though I do take exception when you bring up DARPA canards like Gaia, the channel. I mean, spare me. But anyways, I don't want to expose anybody, but hey, gee, I just exposed everybody. Okay, so where were we? Well, yeah, I think that there are anthroposophists that concern themselves with Wittgenstein, and he's hard to avoid if you're pursuing philosophy because he's perhaps the most significant philosopher in many people's eyes of the 20th century. Although I would differ with that, and I would say that Rudolf Steiner's philosophy of spiritual activity, or sometimes known as the philosophy of freedom, is really the one that should be noted, but they tend to not give Rudolf Steiner kudos, and because they can't read them, I think is the key. There's this one really significant atheist philosopher. I forget his name now. He's American, but he said, he said, the philosophy of freedom, it's one of the greatest books of the 20th century, but what is all that other stuff? And so I think that's kind of the take when you try to approach these things with the abstract mind, and which reminds me that I had a quote that was relative to that, but now I don't know where I put it. So isn't that a beautiful thing? When you have so many entertaining points that you can't keep them all straight. But yeah, I think that you have the whole idea of wisdom, love, and will. And so wisdom without love can be brutal, as you were saying. And that's the point. Or even going in a more earthly sense, that the reason without love, without compassion, can be brutal. And that's kind of like that, going in the direction of this whole AI canard that's being floated out as if there's some kind of binary solution for human destiny, which is absurd beyond belief. But that's the world we're living in now. And going back to this whole pentagram idea, the number 5 is the 5th mystery, and the 5th mystery is the mystery of evil, good and evil. And so in apocalyptic numbering, it's that 5th that is preventing you from accessing the 6th. And what is the 6th? Well, that's the mystery of the Logos. That's Christ. And so that befuddles the ordinary intellect. And Rudolf Steiner had made the point, and I made this last week, there it was an extremely insightful, was that talking about that people, once consciousness had moved forward, because remember, thematically, we're talking about the cycles of the ages, and so we're in the 5th post-Atlantean period, which is dealing specifically with the challenge of the mystery of evil, and that began in 1414, sometimes given as 1413, but that has to do with because Rudolf Steiner was using an older system of numbering, because remember, there's no year zero. Okay, so that if you count 2,160 years from the beginning of the age of Pisces, then you arrive at 1414. There is no year 0, so just keep that in mind. But I don't want to confuse people with too many details, but I guess that's what happens when you're chasing truth. So in understanding the entry into this idea, well, for example, we could just take the number of our episode. This is episode 72, which is, that's the span of a human life, essentially. That's 1 degree precession of the equinox. Okay, so we're getting in this whole idea of this cosmic understanding. And it's actually fully relevant to the conversation we're having, because it was through Schiller's meeting Goethe. And at first, he rubbed Goethe the wrong way, but then he ended up becoming his dearest friend. And so you see that this young pup in Goethe's eyes, and then coming together and having such a profound effect on Goethe. And actually, it was Schiller that convinced Goethe to do the second part of Faust, and it even caused Goethe to go back and rework the first part of Faust. But what was that element that was reworked? It was that cosmic understanding, and that is something that Schiller saw in Goethe, and Schiller seeing it in Goethe helped to bring it out of Goethe further, and that's that cosmic element. And so you see the chorus mysticus at the beginning, that whole idea of the celestial choir, and then if you go into Schiller's work with Wallenstein, it's a marvelous story about the general of the 30 Years' War, but Rudolf Steiner talks about how Schiller had inserted elements of astrology and destiny into the story, and he said they weren't really necessary for the story. It'd still be a great story without that, but yet you see that there's this whole larger vista awakening in Schiller as a result of his encounter with Goethe. And Goethe was very much a part of Goethe's understanding, because if you go to, for example, where Goethe lived in his home, he had 12 paintings of himself representing the signs of the zodiac and different events in his life that archetypally were represented. And so he was very much into that, and he studied Jakob Böhme and Paracelsus and the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz and all this. Of course, there's very little that Goethe didn't study, because he's one of the greatest polymaths of all time. But that being said, in understanding the work of Rudolf Steiner, you have to realize the profound effect of Goethe. Of course, he was the editor of Goethe's scientific works, and the first building, the first Goetheanum, was a theater building that was designed with principles of metamorphosis coming out of Goethe's work, and on and on. There's no end to that. But going back to, I didn't even get to the story I was going to tell, because I went down some rabbit hole. I don't know. I don't even recall which one. But I was talking about Christian community and Carlo Pietzner, who was he was the associate of Karl Koenig, who started the Christian community, which was the center for the mentally handicapped, and it's fascinating, the development here in the United States and in England and Scotland and Ireland, but he had spent time on the Isle of Man interred, because he was spoke German, and so this group, they all taught each other their disciplines, and Willy Zucker was there, and he's really the father of astrosophy, of course, coming after Elizabeth Vrede. But you go, well, what is the ultimate fruit that Rudolf Steiner is talking about when he gets into saying that, where is it? But it must be developed in a direction which was actually begun by Goethe in his fairy tale of the green snake and the beautiful lily. It must be practiced in such a way that it leads to imagination. And so that's a real key, because the fairy tale, the green snake and the beautiful lily, is very much dear to my heart. And I like the translation by Thomas Carlyle. And that's this is included on the Rudolf Steiner archive. You can access these particular lectures from the very, very early beginnings of Rudolf Steiner's developing spiritual scientific work. But they have Goethe's Secret Revelation. Let's see, I'm going to get the right angle of light. There you go. And you see it's even spelled with the British. They tend to change names all the time. So we kept that on the cover as kind of like a humorous thing with a PH instead of the F. And they said, "Oh, why did you do that? We've been trying to get rid of that for so long, and now you're stirring it back up again." But anyways, so we published this, and it's our edition that was published at the Mayflower Bookshop back when I was the manager there. And see, I even have a year on it. In 1980 at Trismegistus Press. But it's Goethe's Secret Revelation and the Riddle in Faust. And it has two parts, but and part two has the exoteric and the esoteric. And these are addresses that were given in Berlin in 1909. And it gives you the import of Steiner's. Here's a drawing that comes with it. See, there's the three kings. So why am I saying all that? Well, I think it's kind of cool that the edition that's presented on the Rudolf Steiner archive is the one that we printed, because it was really such a rare book. I mean, it was printed in an early edition out of the UK. There might have been maybe 150 copies or something like that printed, I have one over here, one of the originals. And then, of course, there's another one that follows it. But we didn't even have a copy of that at the time. So it's fascinating when you look back at the history of Rudolf Steiner's work as it started evolving, and people today don't appreciate the access that they have. And in fact, now the Rudolf Steiner archive has expanded, and I just received an email to that effect. I knew that it had expanded because James told me, James Stewart, who started the whole endeavor. But there is a new development that I just found out from Liz Hamilton in Australia. She sent me an email, and it has to do with the fact that as some of you may already know, because I put the link below, but there's the new Rudolf Steiner archive development, the steinerlibrary.org. But what they've done, see, James started the archive so long ago that it's cobbled together, and there's different generations of technology all woven together, trying to keep the thing rolling. It's got servers all over the world, and is accessed by huge numbers of people. But the Herculean task of reconstructing it with more of an integrated programming system is tremendous. And but nonetheless, they've been able to do it, and they've been able, on behalf of the younger generation, have created a smartphone-friendly, tablet-friendly version so that you can get to Rudolf Steiner's work on your smartphone more effectively. So I thought that's very interesting. That's steinerlibrary.org. So that's a little plug for my friend James, and who was also involved in the heart research. But anyways, boy, am I digressing today. So in getting back to understanding and getting more deep into the topic, like what do I do? Well, I instead of going out on New Year's Eve every year, I would read the fairy tale The Lily and the Green Snake and stay home. It was amateur night, everybody's out on the road doing the crazy Dionysian celebration, and I was home trying to balance the Apollonian and the Dionysian by reading the fairy tale of the beautiful lily and the green snake. And what is Rudolf Steiner getting at? Well, he's getting at that. He said that Schiller and Goethe were at the stage in evolution. They were before the 1879 when Michael, the archangel Michael, defeated the spirits of darkness, right? And that led to a major transition as far as the development of cosmic thought. And it's also before the end of the Kali Yuga, that roughly 5,000 year period starting from the departure of Krishna up to 1899, which was when Rudolf Steiner had his, what you might call his Christological Pauline experience. And so they were before that, but they were wrestling with, what can we do? How do we get to the ideas of spirit? That the dry bones of the intellect were not capable of getting there. And you see that whole investigations, well, Immanuel Kant and most of the people were trying to digest Immanuel Kant's critique of pure reason, and so there was this whole undergrowth going on. How do we get there? And people had become so enwrapped in the intellect that really is something that developed, as I had spoken before, in the 4th century, around 33 AD. There was this transition from the ancient world, and when people could still be sensitive to the Gnostic teachings and the revealed teachings that were sourced really through the astral body and not through the ego. But yet, in 33 AD, you have a transition being made, and all those things were pushed aside, and one would conflict with that and say, well, they shouldn't have done that, but it was kind of a destiny in human consciousness to feel itself entirely separate from the world of spirit, to be able to consolidate the intellect. And now it's the point at which we have to now take this intellect and anoint it through the forces of the heart. And that's the key that we keep getting to, is that art is higher than philosophy. And that's the whole idea of Schiller's was that we're most truly human when we're at play. That is the aesthetic education of man had to do with being able to find that point of equilibrium between the Apollonian and the Dionysian streams. Those two streams are laid out just imaginatively and artfully by what's his name, Friedrich Nietzsche. I had him hiding in the back of my mind. And his Birth of Tragedy, which was his first book, which made quite a stir, and he showed the two different casts of soul in the ancient Greek literature, that you had the Dionysian stream and then you had that Apollonian stream. And so you tie that Apollonian, like I said, to that idea of reason, and the Dionysian to the forces of nature. And so Schiller's point is that the way in which you deal with this is through the aesthetic, and that by being artful in your dealings. And so he's showing the point that we made before, because you have the good, the true, and the beautiful. Well, so it's through beauty, through the pursuit of creating beauty in our world, that we can harmonize the good and the true. And so that's kind of a point that I wanted to make, and I'm probably going on too long, but it's something that I struggle with daily.
I never find you going on too long. Oh gosh, where do I begin with all of that? I mean, certainly play was important to Wittgenstein as well. The whole concept of language games, which of course have been a notorious disaster outside of philosophy because it sounds trivial to the moneyed classes. Mind you, what doesn't sound trivial to the moneyed classes? And we can't, man doesn't live by property development alone, so maybe who cares? Um, oh, yeah. Ways to, I mean, I've spent New Year's Eves slaughtered sometimes, I confess. More often than not, it would end up with me. I think I went to Trafalgar Square once. You know the habit over here that if you're in London, you go there and sort of stare at each other, and there's a fountain, and you listen to Big Ben. I think I've done it once. I can't. It was just awful. Far too many people with nothing to do. Um, I normally spend my New Year's Eve, which I detest. I detest New Year's Eve for two reasons. There's no religious significance. So it's an arbitrary point of time. Plus the fact it seems to be just out for trouble. Lots of people drinking too much and not having a nice time. Um, I know for times I recollect, I wasn't as studious as yourself. I'd always end up arguing about the merits of David Hockney with somebody. And I still don't know if I like him. What an annoying man he is. That bloody swimming pool thing. But he has his moments. He has his moments. So, and that sort of northern, you know, dreariness, sort of the world-weary northerner, or I've had enough. I've had enough of all this. That's David Hockney, isn't it? Anyway, it always ended up with me having an argument with somebody about David Hockney. I am not sure where to go with it because you said so much. I'm not sure where to go with it. I'll hand it back, John, because you said so much. I'm going to have to think about that.
Well, I'm not going to call you a coward.
No, the only thing I'm worried about is if you get us blackballed from Gaia. Well, no, right. All right, let's have a go. Schiller's one of the people I love, and I studied not to any great depth. I don't have anything like the grasp of Goethe that you do. Certainly, Steiner, I wouldn't dream of saying I had a grasp of Steiner like you do. I find it odd that people ignore the philosophy of freedom. And it's ignored. And we've all got to face it. It's not criticized, it's ignored. I don't know why it's ignored. I mean, the American atheist friend of yours is completely correct. I mean, it's a standalone work. You don't need the rest of anthroposophy to tackle that book. I skim read it years ago. I need a new copy, and my copy got purloined like so many. I had a very extensive library at some point. Lots of stuff went missing. We'll leave it there. I need that back for a closer look. I remember thinking at the time I could see how it all worked, and I couldn't see how it fitted in with anthroposophy. So it's interesting somebody else is saying that, although I suspect it's rather central and pivotal to the whole thing, and I don't think it's simply stuff that's surrounding it. I think then, I hate speaking for Britain. Who am I to speak for a whole nation? I hate speaking for academia for two reasons. I don't think there's much real modern academia. And the bit that there is, I think, is so beleaguered nowadays. It's struggling for funding, and including in the serious sciences, including the physical sciences, the really serious work tends to be underfunded. It's always the stuff to do with technology, industry, and I suppose in some ways quite rightly, it's never to do with the stuff that maybe might make the human condition better. I mean, I've seen some extraordinary dissertations over the last couple of years, which will never see the light of day because it just doesn't fit funding criterion, and no one will use it afterwards because they don't want to. Not that it can't be used; they don't want to use it. So I think that what I'm speaking for academicians. I don't think they know what to make of it, and they prefer seeing Steiner as a mystic. I mean, the minute that's in the equation in sort of sourpuss Britain, you've got to sort of, I mean, it's weird. I think everybody else has a different opinion of what the British are doing. You know, I think they're like sidestepping it, because you'll always get somebody who knows the text 10 times better than you in at least 15 languages, and they will show you where you're wrong, you know, over a period of months. So academicians like sidestepping mystical texts, but in this case, there's almost a willful pigeonholing of Steiner in that category, you know, which is odd, because with all the stuff that came out about Jung, you know, the Red Book, for example, and all the stuff that came out of Wittgenstein's diaries, you know, an atheist, yes, but one that had enjoyed mystical experiences, you know, so it's okay with them, sort of. But, you know, if you actually say, well, you know, right, I've got this very Goethean view that it actually reminded me a great deal of Kant, to be honest, you know, in this sort of subject-oriented view of philosophy and its problems. What they want to do is just sideline it. Oh yes, wasn't he some sort of, you know, some sort of guru or something? Wasn't he some sort of new age guy? And it's nearly willful. That's what I find odd. I mean, they do it to too many people. And nowadays, of course, since the academy isn't even what the academy was, it's nearly laughable what they're doing. But that doesn't repair the problem. In Steiner's case, a great carriage of injustice is still being purloined, is still being perpetrated. And it's hard to know what to say to that. I wish we could all get the philosophy of freedom back to a standalone work, and it was included on a number of reading lists. I personally would love to see it measured against Kant. You know, without right, I told you the argument once about how you pronounce karma. The one I remember from King's College, which was even better, was how you pronounce Kant. I'm sorry, Dr. Barnwell. Isn't it said can't? And this went on for 10 minutes. You know, so you know, whatever. You know, would he have been worried about it? No, he wouldn't. You know, so I think it, and of course, Kant was a devout Christian. People tend to forget that. You know, this sort of robotic life where he was frightened of dropping dead before he said his piece. That's understandable. The heavyweight analytic philosophy, that's understandable. They don't like him talking about Christianity. Sorry, that's something to do with it all, whether you like it or not. And I remember, you know, right at the back of my mind somewhere, I remember thinking, right, admittedly, I didn't know as much about Goethe in that particular time frame. But looking back, I remember thinking it really reminds me of Kant. It really reminds me of the critique of practical reason, not the critique of pure reason. Yeah, I'd like to see the debate deepening, but I have no idea how we do that unless we set up some sort of reading circle for those interested and say, look, let's all read it together and give it a second blast. Handing back to you, John.
Well, I had the good fortune of taking classes at the Waldorf Institute that was located here in the Detroit area. And it was headed by Werner Glass, who was one of the principal students of Walter Johannes Stein, the author of the 9th century world history in the light of the Holy Grail. And so that's kind of an underpinning to my first book, The Arcana of the Grail Angel. And of course, I mentioned in the preface that I don't deal with the subjects that Walter Stein dealt with, that they should go and read his book, which is a masterpiece. It also ignored almost completely. And so you look at it and you see that it's what's been described as the Orthodox conspiracy of silence. And that's a phrase that, well, the first time I heard it was Gerald Massey, the adventurous Welshman that dealt with Egyptology in a kind of an unconventional way, but trying to illustrate the astronomical underpinnings of Egyptian mysteries. And it was carried forward by Alvin Boyd Kuhn and Who is This King of Glory and all that, and where you get, if they go too far with it, like some people like to do, and they say, well, you know, the Bible story is just an astronomical allegory, and they dismiss it. It's just a figurative myth. And of course, we go back to the great conversion conversation that was had between C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, and they're discussing the mythology because they're both, of course, Oxford dons and dealing specifically with legends and lore and mythology, and C.S. Lewis makes that point about Scripture, and he was thoroughly familiar with it, but J.R.R. Tolkien says to him, but it's true. And that was the eureka moment for C.S. Lewis when he became a Christian after being agnostic for most of his life. So you say, well, what is that? What's speaking to him from another world? And I think that's a real key in understanding the dynamic of the Inklings, that literary circle of fascinating and illustrious characters that's now a point of the Orthodox conspiracy of silence, so to speak. They don't go back there these days. There's many subjects that you can't even approach at the universities in the UK at this time. With the passing on or leaving of certain individuals in academia over there, they've never been replaced. And so you have this severance from the tradition, and it's disturbing, really. But if you go to France, they still keep it alive. They still have esoteric studies, doctoral programs, and all of that. And of course, you have some great things going on in the Netherlands too, and goes without saying, of course, Germany and Austria and Switzerland. These things, you can access them on a level of academia. But that being said, I wanted to get to where was I? Oh yeah, there's a wonderful essay that's in the 67 edition of the Golden Blade, which is anthroposophic publication that brought together essays from various anthroposophists of the second generation of anthroposophy and the first generation. But there's an essay in that Ephesus in the Castle of the Grail by Emil Bach, who was one of the original founders of the Christian community. And he does a nice job of framing some very significant ideas. In the beginning of this essay, he says, the greatness of Rudolf Steiner's historic mission in our age, which stands under the inspiration of Michael, lays in his task to raise the power of intelligence, which had been given over to man once more into spiritual heights. Anthroposophy is thus, as he himself often pointed out, a new and decisive stage in the spiritual development which leads on from Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas. Human intelligence had once to be brought out from the hidden realm of the mysteries into the free daylight of everyday life. This happened when Aristotle gave his stamp to human thought, setting Europe upon its specific occidental path. What has to happen now is for Aristotelianism to be resurrected in the sense that now the realm of the mystery can be entered once more with fully awakened intelligence. Through Thomas Aquinas, a new stage was achieved. Not once more for Europe as such, but for Christian Europe and the human intelligence connected with Christianity. The task of anthroposophy is now a further development and enhancement of Thomism through raising the spiritualized intelligence to a new knowledge of the sensory world, and in particular of the mysteries of Christ. So that's a lot there, but basically what you're seeing, and it lies to a very much a karmic destiny that leads from Aristotle to Thomas Aquinas to Rudolf Steiner. And so when you look at that and you see the uniqueness of that particular path, because there's no mystery wisdom involved in Aristotle. He was not initiated into the mysteries. In fact, but he was present at Ephesus. He watched the temple of Ephesus as it burned. And it's the classic that he came upon his inspiration for the 10 categories while watching the burning of the temple of Ephesus. So you see that the 10 categories, that could be like the 10 sephira of the Kabbalistic tree of life, or the 10-fold manifestation of the spheres of the hierarchies. And so you see, because man, there's the 9 hierarchies plus the human kingdom, man, woman, man. And so if you look into this and then you go to Thomas Aquinas, and the second most quoted source in Aquinas is the writings of Dionysius the Areopagite, the first bishop of Athens, who was initiated by Paul at the Areopagus, right? And you could see that one of the leading figures in Athens converting to Christianity, becoming the first bishop of Athens, as a result of the fact that when he was a young man, he was in Egypt, in the city of Heliopolis, the city of the sun, of which Moses was a high priest of the city of Heliopolis, the Egyptian name An. And so when he was a young man in Heliopolis, he had an experience of a darkening. And when he met Paul, and Paul told him the story of the mystery of Golgotha, he realized, because he kept track of that date, because it didn't fit his ideas of the way things should have gone, that there shouldn't have been a darkening at that time. And he realized it coincided with his experience of darkening, that the actual mystery of Golgotha coincided with him, and that was what brought him to an awakening to Christianity. And so I guess, why am I saying this? Well, I think that mankind has lost their mystery language, that they don't have this cosmic relationship. Other than this very like pop horoscopes you read in the newspaper kind of view, but if you get into, as I have, because I used to lecture at astrology conferences and all that, and we had a radio show for some time, one of the highest rated radio shows in Detroit, Astrology on the Line, and we'd take phone-in callers and all that, me and Robert from the Mayflower. But if you get into trying to talk to astrologers, modern day astrologers, about what is astrology, why does it work, well, they come up with all this kind of abstract information that doesn't reveal much of anything regarding the cosmic understanding, the cosmic astrology of astrosophy, which has to do with the workings of the spiritual hierarchies, and not some kind of mechanistic, mechanical worldview of mechanical forces or anything to that effect. But the clearest statement that Rudolf Steiner gives is that, well, if you look at the horoscope and you look at the positions of the planets, what they do is they block certain cosmic forces from the realm of the stars. And so that the significance of position of a planet in your horoscope has to do with what area of space is being eclipsed or blocked. And that's the closest you can get to the physical manifestation of astrology. But and it's very noted, and I mentioned on numerous occasions Tycho de Brahe, the Danish astronomer, and he was the mentor of Johannes Kepler, who came up with the rules of planetary motion and the orbital, the planetary orbits relating to the series of platonic solids, and just he's the father of modern astronomy, and I didn't know I was going to be talking about this. I'll dig up the quote on some later episode. But Kepler basically set about, because Tycho was into astrology very much, more than anybody. And he actually predicted the death of the what's his name? I forget his name, but he was the Muslim leader of Turkey, and he successfully predicted the death date that occurred after Tycho de Brahe died, and it proved his effectiveness. But Kepler got into astrology because he wanted to disprove it, and he ended up becoming an astrologer because he could not disprove it. That's an important point for anybody with a history of understanding of the history of science, and they tend to forget that part. They tend to they lionize Kepler, but they ignore statements like that because it goes against their model of the universe. And so you have to realize that the Orthodox conspiracy of silence is just a big obstacle in trying to come to some kind of rational understanding of the way in which the world works.
You're on form, Mr. Barnwell, today, so it's hard to know how to keep all the different sections together. There is one college, actually, not the Courtaulds Institute. Oh, what is it called? It will come to my mind in a minute. There's one college that does esoteric studies, the Warburg Institute. It's got a very high reputation. It's largely postgraduate. You've either got to be a Marxist to get in there, or you've got to be a historian. I mean, there are other ways of looking at those materials. So it's either pure critique or it's some sort of weird history project. I mean, that's where everybody gets me wrong. I mean, I'm actually a modernist in certain ways. You know, my academic work tends to, right, so it's all on theatre. Sort of the crossover bridge between theatre and theology. There is a crossover there, and so what am I looking at? If ever I get the bloody thing finished, it's to do with immersion and the sacred mysteries as they were enacted in the past, and possibly how they could be reenacted now, which would be through immersive theatre. With, believe it or not, Ibsen as the sort of epoch, because he puts theatre back into that type of immediacy. Forget the first wall, the second wall, the third wall. Right, you're looking at a kitchen sink drama. You know, one of the things that used to amaze me about Ibsen's diaries, and nobody reads the diaries. You know, so you had the sociology plays, you had the psychology plays. They miss the beginning. They miss Brand. They miss the bit in Brand, which of course has a chorus of spirits passing judgment on Brand. That's a big thing to miss, you know. And they miss When Shall We Dead Awaken, which doesn't fit into the narrative at all, because you've got a nun coming in every bloody half hour saying Pax Vobiscum, and so that doesn't fit. You know, they achieve some sort of enlightenment on the top of a mountain. So that doesn't fit. So they have that down as a dream play. You know, what were, oh, the silly old fool. Why didn't he keep on with all this other stuff? Maybe because he'd come full circle. And Ibsen started as one of the leading lights of the Norwegian Folklore Society, which again everybody wants to ignore. And he almost sees plays like a scientific experiment for at least a large part of his career. You know, you get a scene, you get a problem, you get a scenario repeated from different angles. How is somebody seeing it from this angle, from that angle? What does Nora say? What's Nora saying later on in the play? You know, take Hedda Gabler. You know, this he actually calls her in the diaries a demonic woman. So, you know, what's going on there and why? So the scientific method applied to practical metaphysics, which is what they don't want to talk about. So yeah, I mean, I was toying with doing some work at the Warburg myself a couple of years back. I'd still maybe love to do some minor courses there, but no, I mean, it doesn't fit. Either you accept there's more to academia than life, which I do not. Sorry, or you've got to be some sort of, you know, what is plaguing this will get me blackballed once and for all. What is plaguing British academia? It's the fact there is a high priesthood with a religion. They're all left wing, largely materialists, reductive materialists, who hold on to a naturalistic view. And if you're not really subscribing to that, then somehow you don't fit. I mean, that's what's going on in British academia. I don't know what's going on in American academia, obviously. But you know, I've known people who are in it. I've got good friends in it. You know, I mean, the amount of Brazilian sociologists that are actually dictating terms about what is academia and what is not in British universities. And I'm not saying that's wrong, and I'm not saying they don't have a voice. All I'm saying is we need to remember every voice, not just one or two, not just Marxist voice, not just leftist voices, not just historians. You know, the fact that the whole of esoteria, the whole of the esoteric can be reduced to a subtext, a sub branch of history. You know, the history of science or social history, social and cultural history. That's just simply wrong. I mean, to take a very obvious example, you can have a philosophical interest in these things. You can have an artistic interest in these things. You could have a theological interest in these things, none of which is seen as legitimate. And that strikes me as bizarre. Therefore, it's much, you know, I can go on about metaphysics till I'm blue in the face if I'm sat talking about modern theatre, which is the wrong way round. You know, so, and I can go on and on and on about the Ibsen imperative, you know, the Ibsen metaphysic, and everyone will be sat there nodding. If I did that in the so-called correct arena, the correct field, I'd be met with this wall of silence and deaf ears. I think that's wrong. So yeah, I mean, that has left the academy. I was actually told by one Brazilian academician who was actually a good friend of mine, who stayed here for a while before going to the Sorbonne to finish his research, that your type of intelligence has left the academy. And that's correct. You and I would not weather that storm well, John. And that is unacceptable. The whole idea of a university, a universe city, the meeting of different points of view, the meeting of different minds, the meeting and clash of perspectives, which how did that become unhealthy? Is not only how human knowledge thrives, it's how it survives. Without that, I'm deeply worried, excuse me, about what comes next. The fact, God, I'm going to get on my soapbox too much. The fact there are no, which is you've got me in the one field where I want to get on my soapbox and just speak for hours. Like I did something like this on Speaker's Corner. I used to try and confront the British public every New Year's Day. There we are. We're talking about the New Year today. By sometimes going in my gown or my robe and having it out with them at Speaker's Corner. I can't say I was incredibly successful. One time I tried it, it was 6 years ago, 7 years ago. It was so cold on January the 1st, and they all looked so freezing. The ones that were listening to me, 2 or 3 people, I said, look, we're all going for coffee. So we all we forgot Speaker's Corner and went into a Starbucks or something to have a cup of coffee and a donut. The other time I tried having it out with the British public, and it's time you started thinking again. I was completely upstaged by two imams. There was a young imam, because it's a row of people. You go down the row and see what row's taking place. There was a young imam having a row with an older imam. They were meant to be separate speakers, and the older imam was much more moderate and tolerant than the young one, and a row started. And of course, you get the surrounding audiences of the two men of learning. And I thought, that sounds much more interesting than me. I've only got a couple of people listening, so we all went down to listen to the fracas between the Muslim scholars. Should it be done? Could it be done? Yes. Will it be done? I'm not sure. There will never be, as things stand at the moment, another Tolkien. There will never be another C.S. Lewis. I personally find that nightmarish. I'm sick of the Tolkien franchise, but that's not the same thing. Do you know yet another ring of power has been discovered? How many were there? And so it's all the same thing again, storming castles and people looking cool in the twilight. And and sort of, I wish, curiously, the irony being, more was made of. I'm sick of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. If I went, there was a remake recently, which was meant to be definitive. If you saw it too many times, not only were you sort of brainwashed into being a Christian, you were brainwashed into being an unthinking straight Christian. So that's not what he's getting at. That's not what he's getting at. And I'd like to see some of the sci-fi of C.S. Lewis made. I might have said this on the show. I might have said it on another show. I can't remember. I find the fact they were professors of different facets of English history. Excuse me. You get the sort of heavy Anglo-Saxon Tolkien, where everything's lineages. Son of blah and grandson of blah blah. Rode he forth. So you can see where all that stuff comes from. Although I still think Tolkien's translation of Beowulf as the earliest Anglo-Saxon text, the earliest text in English literature, is probably still the best. So we mustn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. And of course, C.S. Lewis did Middle English, so that's nearly French. So everybody's got very, very puffy and Frenchy by that particular time. All these light touches of nuance, all these light touches of nuance and inference, so all that's going on. Right, full circle in conversation. I sort of wish, actually, has that ever been made into a TV program or a movie? That hideous strength, back to that. The idea of a brain separated from a body and what it would do and what it wouldn't do. I'm answering my own question of what I was saying earlier. Yeah, actually, that's, I suppose, how I see the Nazis. This sort of untrammeled, rational intelligence, no feeling whatsoever. So autobahns. Let's what was it? Kraftwerk, fun on the autobahn. Let's have these long straight roads, and if anything gets in the way, like an idyllic little chocolate box town, let's just destroy it and have the autobahn continuing through, because we need speed in the economy. We need rationalization. I can see how that terrifyingly works. So you have the intelligence, but you lose the humanity. The fact that these types of people, the mythology that goes with the Inklings tends to irritate me, if I'm honest. They all met at the Eagle and Child, and they were all British eccentrics, and they all had medium dry sherry. Oh, no. Is it true? I don't care. I don't care. The fact they used to grade each other's work, that I care about. That's interesting. And if somebody didn't get an A grade, C.S. Lewis, you didn't get an A grade for that chapter, says Tolkien. They'd go away and write it again. Now that's wonderful. Is all that gone? Yes, it's gone. It's not going to be replaced. It's never coming back. What's replaced it is sociology, the social sciences. I'm not against the social sciences, but I'm a massive skeptic about what they can say and what they can't say. And nobody really wants to challenge the model of the social sciences in contemporary academia, which I find extraordinary. how we raise again the raft, the flag, the mast of scholarship in fields as complex and delicate as the esoteric sciences, I don't know, but certainly, it's funny, but it's not funny. What's allowed to be discussed in the academy and what's not allowed to be, and the deaf ear that's constantly turned to anybody, me included, that wants to talk about those things. For me, maybe I went through a stage at one point where I thought it was funny. Now I find it hideously dangerous, and the commodification of human thought. This is how you think about something. There are no other ways of thinking. This is how you interpret. There are no other methodologies of interpretation. I mean, that's leading us down a road surely none of us really want to go down. And it's always used to fend off people like Rudolf Steiner, the one that really is the uncomfortable figure because he's one of their own, but they wish he wasn't. It's always used against people like that, and there aren't many. And really, what they don't want is a type of discourse that raises man above what can be defined. I said, right. Gabriel Marcel said there are basically two ways of looking at life. You either look at it as a scientific problem needing a resolution, or you look at it as a mystery. If you approach it as a scientific problem needing a resolution, by the way, when is life a problem that needs a resolution? Someone has to tell me what that means first and where that came from. So he says what you end up with quite an accurate picture, but it's denuded, it's shallow, it's minimized, it's not really a description of the human condition. And if you go down the other route, that really everything stems from mystery, then all right, it's not as precise, it's not as clear, it's not as piercing as we will ever want it to be, but it's truer to what a human being is and how they express themselves, live, and how they feel and drink and eat and get into fights and talk about David Hockney and read Goethe. If we're reducing things all the time, and we are at the moment, I mean, I don't know, as I say about the American Academy, I hear it's worse because there are things that aren't even raised as possibilities, at least places like not the Coulthard, as I say, what was the other one I mentioned again? Warburg, at least they're raising certain issues, but again, if you're reducing it to certain disciplines, and only those disciplines, why can't you have a psychology? I mean, that's because apparently that's not a real science. So isn't that doctoring? That's like having a game of chess, but you've taken away all of the white bits at the front, so there are no pawns that actually can hold people back in their tracks anymore. It's all the heavyweights, and all the heavyweights can't move properly against each other. We've got to be very careful about what we're throwing away in our need to understand the problem of life, which, as I say, some of us wouldn't understand as a problem anyway. Passing back to you, John, you look utterly perplexed. Perhaps I've just been perplexing people for no reason. I don't.
Well, no, I think you're frustrated. And, okay, you look at the history of the Warburg Institute, and who comes to mind for me? Dame Frances Yates, okay, and her works, Rosicrucian Enlightenment, and that whole series of books that she did on the relationship of the Rosicrucian impulse to what came out of the court of Queen Elizabeth and John Dee and the Shakespearean dramas and getting in the court of James and Jacobite, not to be confused with Jacobean, because the Jacobeans were the bad sort that took the French Revolution to its awful decline with the beheading of Marie Antoinette and her husband. But no, the Jacobites refer to the lineage of James the First, and which there was a great deal of esoteric underpinning in the reign of James and also in the reign of Queen Elizabeth. I mean, John Dee was her court astrologer, yes. And James the First, well, he went to Uraniborg, to Tycho de Brahe's island with his new bride, Christine, she was actually Danish. She was a Danish princess. And so you have this whole underlayer. You have the relationship between James the First and Emperor Rudolf II, the alchemical emperor, the Holy Roman Emperor of the Habsburg dynasty. Well, Dame Frances Yates is really the person who follows up after her is American, and that's Marcia Keith Schuchard, and Restoring the Temple of Vision, Kabbalistic Freemasonry and Stuart Culture is her major work. As you can see, it's huge. And it's volume 110 in Brill's Studies in Intellectual History. And she is a dear friend of mine. She's even referenced me in articles, scholarly articles that she's written. But she was very well grounded in understanding a whole milieu of thought that is really the esoteric underpinnings of Western culture. And she was a protege of Gershom Schlom, the noted Kabbalistic scholar. And so she's still working. I tried to get her to come on a podcast, but she said she can't do it. She's in her 80s, and so, but she's just a venerable old soul that's just been working so hard for so many years. And so there are people that are trying to deal with that rescuing imagination, because it's really what's needed moving into the future, because the nihilistic solipsism of these Marxist incursions into academia. I mean, geez, if you go to Germany and you go to the Goethe Institute, oh, who do you find there? Well, that's like the source of the Frankfurt School. That's like, they're the ones that came to the United States and they corrupted our institutions with socialist ideas. And Goethe would have nothing to do with that, but yet they came out of the Goethe Institute. So it seems like they're always co-opting venerable institutions and putting them to the service of their materialism. And so, and you have the whole tradition of utilitarianism, and I mean, they're everywhere. They're running around and they have no imagination. And so our recourse is not philosophy, although yes, the philosophy of freedom. And Rudolf Steiner refers to it as being constructed like a symphony, and that you can't really just enter into it anywhere. For somebody who has a background in the abstract intellect, it's perfect, because he gives you that whole linear development of thinking, leading you to the conclusion in the end, which, by the way, I hit your mute button if you don't want to hear a spoiler, but basically the book is a training in how to think like an angel, which essentially that is what imagination is. And so, that being said, I would like to point out to you that we're here with my venerable friend, Reverend David William Parry, and thus far he has 3 books, although apparently there's more in the pipeline. His first book is A Grammar of Witchcraft, and that's not a grimoire, it's not a how-to book, it's a Shakespearean study. And his second volume is Caliban's Redemption, which is Shakespearean-esque poetry. And his major work is Mount Athos Inside Me, Essays on Religion, Swedenborg and the Arts, edited by the very talented Daniela Irandust. And by the way, Martha Keys Schuchard is also a Swedenborgian scholar. So I have yet to plumb all the depths of that with her. But these books are all available on Amazon, and they're really wonderful books. He has such a mastery of the language. It's just, I'm envious. But it doesn't make me hate him. My envy doesn't go that far. And for myself, like I said, his books are available on Amazon. Please pick them up. If you want to follow what we're talking about, it'll help. I got mountains of books tumbling next to me here. I have 2 books. My first volume is The Arcana of the Grail Angel, The Spiritual Science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail. And that's the back. It's a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and the True Rosicrucian Order, and as a forward by my best buddy, Douglas Gabriel of American Intelligence Media, has a great many diagrams. It's 640 pages, and the whole series of diagrams, which are based on diagrams that crossed my way many years ago by Erdford Pfeiffer, the direct student of Rudolf Steiner. And so all those diagrams are reproduced in my second volume, and I added a whole bunch more. And the second volume is Arcana of Light on the Path, Star Wisdom of the Tarot and Light on the Path, where I use that schemata of 22 and the 22 schemata of Light on the Path to try and develop an imaginative understanding of the spiritual path. And both of my books are available in the continental US on eBay directly from me. If you're outside of the US, you can contact me through my academia link below, or you can contact me by private message on Facebook. And those of you that get my books or that donate to me, I include you in my emails that I send out to those that have donated or purchased my books. And so if you contact me on that through PayPal.me/John Barnwell 888, or for Reverend David, it's PayPal.me/D Parry 777, and buy us a cup of coffee. Even $1 is appreciated. And so if you want to get it in the loop there, you can jump on board, and it'd be great to see you there. And I also want to thank the support that we've received from Tyler, Vadim, and the others that are out there that have contributed to enable me to continue this discussion. It's been very rewarding, especially for myself. And so I'm sure it's rewarding for David too. For me, it kind of gives me energy to get through the week. And with all the scientism running around, faux scientism, it's a real refresher to be able to try and artistically approach the mysteries of the Divine Sophia. So Reverend David, if you could put an end on this and consecrate it with one of your wonderful prayers.
Yeah, I'm quite willing to sing Buffalo Girls, Won't You Come Out Tonight, like an old rummy for a cup of coffee. As a threadbare cleric, I'm also willing to do corporate dues, bar mitzvahs. I'm available. No, it's one of the highlights of my week too. I mean, remember we have every first Sunday of the month we have a service of St. Valentine's Hall. We can't increase it because of apparently all the restrictions have been lifted, but they're all sort of still there. So we've got to respect our guests until we get our own church premises, our own premises. So it's quite demanding getting from a church service to do this show, but I look forward to the show and your good company so much. It's, you know, it's the last resort not to be able to make this show. It's an uplifting weekly experience. It's always great talking to you, and I think we're building a small community. I wish there were more people in it, because I think there's nothing wrong with a chinwag, and there's nothing wrong with talking about interesting stuff. I mean, what's wrong with that? Let's move into a prayer. I discovered years ago, because I did theology, that most of the saints weren't. They either bought the title or they had friends in various high places in the Vatican normally. You know, this guy was an absolute swine. Let's make him a saint, and hopefully the angels will let him off the hook. So that happens a lot with so-called saints. And some of them are crazy. This will get me blackballed. I don't particularly like the Desert Fathers, because some of the stories are on the verge of psychosis. There was one, was it Father, not Maximus, one of them, M something or other, I'm shot away now, who felt so guilty. You know, he squashed a gnat or something. He felt so guilty that he went to a swamp near the desert and allowed himself nearly to be stung to death by the gnats so they could get their own back, and came back so badly stung he was actually in their infirmary for a week. I'm sorry, the guy's a psycho. He's not a saint, right? He needs some therapy. Get your life together, mate. That's not sainthood. That's milking something. But every now and again, of course, you do get a saint. You get someone who's what is religion? The pursuit of love, the pursuit of wisdom, the pursuit of enlightenment, the inner journey, which is why I wanted to read from St. Francis today. My friends, please bow your hearts just for a few words from someone I personally think is a genuine saint. Some of you will know it. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. If we can do that with our nearest and dearest in the days ahead until we all meet again, and indeed do it in that great mystery of mysteries with ourselves, then surely the great religious enterprise, the great quest, the ultimate crusade will have taken just a few steps further on. Bless you all until we meet again next Sunday. Amen.
Amen. Well, yeah, thank you very much. And yes, thank you for reminding me. Click the like button. Apparently that's very helpful. And share this with people you know. I'm trying to keep this going here, and hopefully it'll be a successful venture. And so to all of you, until next time, adieu.